exciting world of the Nordic Noir fictions. To take us on a journey through this dark world of Nordic Noir fiction, we have with us the godfather of Nordic Noir fiction, Kjell Dahl from Norway, and Halligrimur Helgason, the renowned author from Iceland, who gave us the unforgettable 101 Reykjavik, Woman at 1000 Degrees, and other bestsellers. They are in conversation with our very own Ashwin Sanghi, who ranks among the India's highest-selling English fiction authors. Let's start the session with a big round of applause.
So I'm delighted to be sharing a stage with people who have perfected the art of creating chills and thrills. So I'm delighted to be here. Kjell and Halligrimur, welcome. And let me kick off by requesting both these gentlemen. Kjell, you are often called the Godfather. I don't know, it has an almost mafioso sound to it, but you're called the Godfather of Nordic Noir. And I think, am I mistaken if the first novel was around 1993?
That's true.
That's right. So I was just wondering as to, a person of your background, I think you have degrees in psychology and law and the rest of it. So what makes someone like that suddenly turn to writing? How did that happen?
I think I always have been wanting to write from I was very early. I started to write songs. I was a rock musician when I was a teenager.
Okay.
That was the start for me.
Okay. And the storytelling bit, how did that happen? I mean, because songwriting and storytelling are a little different.
I mean, it has involved in a very natural way. I've always been very fond of reading and fascinated by characters and the fantastic universe that is in books. So I wanted to create that kind of story myself. Mm-hmm. Stories that I myself like to read. I wanted to write that kind of stories.
And so that first novel of yours, which was Lethal Investments, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it as an original.
Dödens investeringar.
Exactly. So now you can see my reluctance. That's how much time did that take you to actually write?
I think I used 4 years.
Right.
Because I was very inexperienced and had to work with my editor. I was very happy that the editor did like the first draft. Mm-hmm. And he was very clever. He said, you maybe should change a little bit here and there. And it was a process that took 4 years. A lot of drafts.
Wow. Halligrimur, tell us a little bit more about, because you've also led a very varied life. You've been an artist, painter, you've been, you've lived all over the world, Paris included. So, I mean, the point I'm making is that where did your stories come from? How did they emerge? And what was the point at which you realized this is something that I want to do?
In my subconscious, I always knew that I would one day start writing, but I was a young man. As a young man, I went to art school, mm-hmm. So I started to be a painter, and I moved to New York, and I wanted to break into the art world, and it was very difficult. There are 200,000 artists living in New York, so it was a big competitive field, and I didn't sell any painting, and then I decided maybe I can. And I had no money at all, and I just said to myself, maybe I can write some articles. Mm-hmm. About the life in New York and send it to Iceland, to the papers there. And this actually happened, and I wrote more and more articles, and then I came home for Christmas, and everybody said, wow, great articles, why don't you write a book? And I said, wow, I never really thought, how do you write a novel? I didn't have any idea how to do it. But the next summer after that, I decided to give it a try and decided to write a novel. And it was like my sort of, the first handiwork that I had to learn. And it was not a really good novel, but it was a learning process.
Yeah.
And then I found my voice in the next one, and gradually I started writing more than painting. And today I'm like 80% writing and 20% painting.
Wow. Wow. And you know, I was reading the outline of your novel, Woman at 1000 Degrees. Now, get this, guys. The story centers around an 80-year-old Icelandic woman who is waiting to die inside a garage with a hand grenade and a computer. Am I right? So, where do these stories come from? I mean, where is the inspiration for something like that?
Well, the inspiration for this one was quite simple, because I was working for my ex-wife. She's a politician, and
I take it she didn't have a hand grenade in her hand.
Almost. We got divorced at least. But she was running for office, and they asked me to help out for the election campaign, and went down to the headquarters, and they gave me a list of phone numbers of one street in Iceland, in Reykjavik, and asked me to call each number up and ask them to vote for the Social Democrats.
Right.
And I started dialing those numbers, and number 5 on the list was an 80-year-old woman living in a garage. And she told me right away, "No, I'm not going to vote for those fucking communists." But she was so interesting, so I started speaking with her, and I ended up talking to her for 1 hour, and I totally forgot everything about the election campaign. She was telling me all about her life in the garage. She had lung disease, so she could hardly move. But she didn't want to be in a hospital because there she couldn't smoke. She wanted to continue to smoke. And she had a computer, she was always online, she had satellite TV. So she had all her world.
Yeah, she was connected.
She was connected and still totally isolated. So I was fascinated by this idea, and I thought maybe I could write a novel about a woman like that. And 2 years later, after I'd finished the book, I decided to go and visit her, but then she had passed away, so I never met her. But I found out who she was, and she was sort of a mini celebrity in Iceland. And her grandfather was the first president of Iceland, and her father fought with the Nazis in World War II, and that's why she had this hand grenade. Her father gave her, as a young girl, she was 11 years old in Germany. He went to fight with the Nazis, and she stayed behind with strangers, and he was afraid that she would be hurt by the Brits, so he gave her a hand grenade
to
protect herself.
Oh, wow.
And then she kept it all her life.
So I was wondering, Kjell, taking off from that, is there, I mean, you know, with the sort of crazy stories that are emerging in Nordic Noir, and some of them are very, very gruesome indeed. Before this session, in fact, we were briefly discussing that. But in your opinion, is that gruesomeness on account of the fact that one is actually experiencing that in real life? Is it inspired from fact? Because I would hate to think that it is. I mean, then I would be imagining a landscape with lots of dead bodies lying all around.
No, I don't think it's inspired by real life, because I think it's a trend in modern Nordic crime fiction that it's a story of kind of serial killers.
Right.
And it tends to be a genre in itself now, this serial killing. And to make the new stories, they start to kill people in the most gruesome way. And I think this is rather speculative. I think it's. I think the crime fiction loses something when all there is left is horror.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Godfather is not happy with the latest trends.
No, well, I would imagine that it's possible to have lots of chills and thrills without gruesomeness. I mean, of course, we've got those idyllic settings of the British whodunits like the Agatha Christie's, where, you know, or you have the American police procedurals. But there is something, and I wanted to ask you this specifically, that is it about the landscape? Is it about the darkness? Is Is it about loneliness? What is it that inspires this very, very, the atmosphere of these novels is so dark and foreboding?
You had, there's a lot of other thrillers too. It's just a trend that is, some writers start to write very gruesome stories. But I don't know. I think it's selling. That's
It
why.
sells. It sells. So, guys, I mean, this is no different to anywhere around the world.
But you have a point with this loneliness and the darkness, and there is a difference living in a country, for example, where I live with 330,000 people, but it's a fairly big country,
Yes.
and so the people are scattered all over, and
Yes.
you hardly ever see any crowds in Iceland, only on soccer games or something like that.
Right.
So there's distance between people, and so it feels different when you murder someone in Iceland. It's like maybe this is the only person living in that fjord, and it's murdered. So
That's right.
it's more serious in a way.
That's right.
And a big part of Norway is like that too. So
Yeah.
I think that also explains it. And darkness. I mean, north of Norway, you have a dark season for several months.
Right. And I noticed that a large number of these stories seem to have female protagonists. So is that also a trend in Nordic noir, that you tend to have more of female detectives and people who have?
I don't know.
No?
I couldn't know that. I don't know that. I think it's both. I think some of the female protagonists are very famous, like
Right.
Stig Larsson's
That's right.
Salander Girl, etc. But I don't think it's a trend. No.
No, it's not a trend.
It will maybe become a trend because now there are more women coming into this field,
Oh, is that right?
starting to write crime novels.
So, Halligrimur, I wanted to ask you this question, that we tend to lump all of this fiction into a broad general categorization of Nordic noir. But are there subtle differences between countries? So, for example, if you are reading Nordic noir from, let's say, Norway, as against something from, let's say, Iceland, would you pick up on subtle differences?
I'm not sure because the Icelandic noir is very much like a child of the Swedish one,
Yes.
influenced by the Norwegian one. So we are the little guys, and we don't have that many writers and not many people living in Iceland. So we don't really feel like we are part of Scandinavia. Those are the big ones, our big brothers. And Icelanders are a little bit different from the rest of Scandinavia in a way, because I give you a short history lesson. Iceland was the last country in the world to be populated. It was a virgin island until the year 874. Then some Norwegians came over, but they came over via Scotland and Ireland, took slaves, took wives from there. So we are a blend of Gaelic and Norse genes. So when I'm asked about the difference between Icelandic literature and Scandinavian or Norwegian one, I usually say that Icelandic literature is like Hamsun gone wild, that is Oscar Wilde. So we have this Irish and Scottish blood in our veins, so we are a little bit different from the Scandinavians, I say.
Understood. Kjell, you live on a farm, right? I mean, you're also a part-time farmer, right?
Yes,
you
I
also
am.
do
Yes.
farming.
Yes.
Now, I was just thinking to myself, I said, Ashwin, if you were to write these sort of stories, living on a farm in isolation, I mean, I'm wondering as to whether I would get any sleep at night. So I'm just wondering, is it the fact that the location influences your writing? Or is it that you are not bothered by the fright that is caused by your writing?
I am very bothered by the fright. It's very inspiring. So, I mean, Halligrimur was talking about isolation as and the darkness as an inspiration. I think that's true for me. So, and it's like sitting in an island and dreaming about another universe.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But the atmosphere is to a very great extent enhanced by the fact that you are sitting where you are.
Yes.
Would you say the same thing?
Yes, I also tend to sort of, when I'm writing, I tend to go away from the city. I have a little house on a little island up north in Iceland that is totally, the darkness is total during the winter. We only have like 3 hours of sunshine. So, and then you get really into very good concentration, you know, and
Right.
so the darkness and this isolation is very good for writing, I think.
Okay.
And
Tell me something that, you know, I mean, most of you, both of you in fact, have had novels translated into other languages. I think out of the 11 novels that in the Nordic Noir segment that you've done, 6, I think, 6 or 7 have been translated.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So, do you believe that the language that is used to communicate those stories, is important, or do you think that the atmosphere is not in any way lost by changing the language in which it's narrated?
I'm not sure. I think that's a difficult question, but the English translator is a person I know very well.
Right.
So because he was in fact the man that got the contract for me in
Right.
England,
Right.
because he liked my books, and I think when he has translated the book, he sends it to me and asked me to read it. It's the only time I read a book, and I think he's very clever. He's very clever.
So, in your opinion, it doesn't take away from the
No,
atmosphere.
but I have heard, because I don't read French, for instance, and some readers can tell me that something was lost in the French edition, for instance. So, but in the English, I'm very satisfied with.
Wonderful.
yes, I have this same experience with France. A friend of mine read my novel in French. It's called 101 Reykjavik, one of the first ones. Got
Right.
filmed.
Right.
And he said, yeah, very good translation, but it's not funny at all. There's no humor in the book. So, but it's a very humorous book, so I was a little bit surprised. And
Yeah.
so my experience is that, well, in English, I tend to work on the translations myself with the translator,
Okay.
because I tend to write in a very sort of difficult way, create many words in my books are not in the dictionary, so new words. And
Right.
I try to bend the language a little bit. So, but all the time I have the feeling that you might only get 90% of the original into another language, sometimes even less.
Right.
And sometimes they translate from the second language. For example, in Korea, they did a Korean version that was done after the German version.
So, in other words, it's a second translation because it's
Yeah.
emerged from an already translated work.
Then I was really worried, and I thought nobody's going to understand or get this book
Right.
in Korean. But then I went to Korea, and they were laughing, and they thought it was so funny. So I was amazed. So
Wonderful. So sometimes it does work.
yeah,
Wonderful. So I'd like to sort of throw this question open to both of you, actually. That a lot of people say that it was the turning point for Nordic Noir, as it were, was Stieg Larsson and the Millennium trilogy. But I'm just wondering, I know for a fact that there were many, many novels in that space which happened way before that. So I'm wondering as to whether you agree or disagree with that statement. Do you think that was a turning point globally?
Yes, I think so, globally, because the genre was very famous in the Nordic countries
Right.
Before Stieg Larsson, but he made a turning point. And I think maybe it is the Salander girl that makes it, because in the first book, this Mikael Blomqvist is more the protagonist.
Correct.
And then when he starts to build out the Salander girl, I think he reached all the female readers in the
Readership.
world.
Exactly. So in that sense, it would not be a false statement to say that that was the defining moment as far as global acceptance of the genre was concerned.
I think so, yes.
But it was kind of sad how it translated over into the English-speaking world, because, for example, the original title of the first book was "Män som hatar kvinnor," meaning "man who hate women." Very strong title.
Right.
But they didn't dare to put it into English.
Right.
Because it was too harsh or something. It would scare people away. And now we are seeing a Hollywood version of the movies being made, and they're getting worse and worse and worse after they. I just read an article in your newspaper here in Kolkata yesterday. It was like a review of the latest movie from Hollywood about this, from these books, and it was really bad apparently. So, but I think, in my impression is that yes, it was such a monumental work, and then the author died, and it was so much drama around it, and it all contributed to the sensation
And the struggle between the inheritance and
That's
everything.
right.
And now there's another man writing books.
That's right.
It's kind of sad also that the author has to die for his books to be really big like that, but it happens all the time. We see it all the time.
But I think in the case of the Millennium trilogy, it was already exceptionally successful during his lifetime, right? Or was that not the case?
No, he died. But he did not want any of the books to be published until he had written all three.
Ah, okay. So that's why there was a delay in terms of actually getting it out. Kjell, I want to ask you this. I was reading somewhere in an interview of yours, you say, "I'm pleased, of course, that readers find things to enjoy in them, but I can always see their weaknesses all too clearly." In other words, almost sort of complaining that there isn't anything like the perfect manuscript.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm working with a manuscript, and when I cannot make it better, I have to publish it. But I think that's one part of my drive of writing, that I want to write a better book next time.
But it's amazing what printing can do to a book. You can have a really bad manuscript, and then it's in print, and it's suddenly a very good book. Some magic happens in the printers. And that's my experience. A book is always a little bit better when it is in print.
Right.
Because sometimes I let people read manuscripts before the book is printed.
Right.
And I get, it's a good book, I like it. And then after it gets published, people are, it's a great novel, and something happens.
That's right. It's almost like it's taken on a different life.
Yeah.
I want to discuss with both of you what your process for plotting and writing is. I mean, as long as I'm not getting you to... In fact, I'd ideally like you to share how that process works. At what stage, how do you ideate? How do you eventually plot? Do you start writing without having plotted, or do you have a detailed outline already in front of you? How does this work?
I think the work is changing with age and experience. Like now, the book I'm writing now, it's a historical novel, and I started to do research on this topic many years ago.
Okay.
And I have saved stuff, and I have written a bit, and I have put it away, and I
Came back to it?
Yes, and doing research is very inspiring for me. I think research opens worlds, and you get new ideas all
Right.
the time.
Right.
So I don't think it's possible to say a general way
Yes.
of plotting.
Yes.
No, I don't think so.
So, typically, how long does it take you? I'm talking specifically about your Nordic noir books. How long does it take you from beginning to end?
I think at least 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And out of which a large portion of the time would be research and plotting.
Yes. Research and I mean, a story has to mature. You have to put it away. You have to have distance to it, and then take it up again. And
So is that the way it works for you?
with fresh eyes, you can see it with fresh eyes. And start
Lovely. And
Yeah,
what about you,
it's-
Halligrimur?
It's very strange being a writer because you always have to be alert. You can get that wonderful idea anytime. I might go to the toilet after this session and get a revelation there. You never know where it's going to
When
be.
it comes,
Yeah.
yes.
For example, I was helping my wife in the election campaign, and I got this idea for a novel. And the latest novel that I'm just published last month in Iceland, I got when I was on a skiing trip up north, and I heard a story. Went to a museum and I saw 2 photographs. You know, it can happen all the time. But then, as you said, Kjell, that it has to mature. You have it's like insemination, and then
Right.
you get pregnant with the idea, and you cannot deliver the baby until it's ready. You know,
Right.
You have to wait,
Right.
and that's really important because the idea gets more juicy with time, and it washes away sort of unnecessary things, and gets more to the core of it, and so usually period of 4 to 6 years is necessary for this pregnancy.
And is that the sort of time frame that you've had for your novels?
No, then I start writing, and that takes maybe 2 years, 2.5. Research also. I believe in research more and more with age, because when I was young, I didn't have the patience to do it. But now I see, like you said, that you get so many ideas from research,
Right.
and your writing becomes deeper, and it's steeped in knowledge and things that actually happened, and it gets richer and richer. Especially if you're writing a historical novel, then it's totally necessary to. Of course, today also people get. There are so many books, and the standard is always getting higher and higher, and.
Right.
And with reading and researching, you just get deeper and better.
So do you work with a fully developed? Do you know the end of your book before you start writing?
Well, it's a mix. You know it and you don't know it, and you make a journey. You decide to go from Calcutta till Delhi.
Yes.
But on the way something might happen.
Some diversions.
Yeah, but you're going to end up in Delhi. But that doesn't really matter where in Delhi you end up, but it's the journey that matters.
Perfect. There have been many adaptations, screen adaptations, and I think for a lot of people, Nordic crime fiction really came into its own with shows like The Killing and The Bridge, Trapped, and Marcella. So many. I mean, it's difficult to name all of them, but in fact, we've also had now series which have the same sort of stylistic sensibility, but are not set in Nordic countries. So, for example, you have shows like Shetland and Broadchurch, which have a lot of that sort of almost that same element, moving very slowly, exploring the character. There are grey areas between the characters. So I was wondering that when you are writing your books, are you also visualizing as to how this would get adapted, or is it completely an isolated process?
For me, it's very important to make that books are books and films are films.
That's right.
Yes, because I think books never get a good life in film. I haven't seen it. I think books are richer. So, but I love films, so I also write movie scripts and have made films of that.
Right.
But of course, when you write, you visualize, because you have to describe things. You have to.
Sure.
So, a friend of mine, he's very hung up now in all the series, and he says the TV series is the new novel. But I disagree, because I think what happens with the long series, for instance, The Bridge or The Killing, the creators are never satisfied. They're never able to end the story. And then the story loses quality, I think. Always.
And to a certain extent, I also feel that at times the fact that you're reading means that it's your own voice,
Yes.
which is going on in your head. So there is no narrator coming in between. There's no third party telling you how the story plays out. Having said that, I agree with you. I love watching the stuff. What about you?
Well, I'm as I told you, I was a painter first, so I come from this visual field, and people tell me that my novels are really visual.
Yes.
Because they're always like picturesque scenes, and you can see everything in front of your eyes. But I don't really think about it myself when I'm writing. It just maybe comes naturally, because I think in a visual way, being a visual artist as well. So I don't think about adaptations, or when I'm writing that this could be a movie. There have been 2 movies made after 2 of my books. But I think I'm more influenced by theater, because I've always been close to a theater. I've written some plays. I've translated Shakespeare to plays by Shakespeare, and I'm now doing Molière for the first time. And so I've been working in the theater. My brother is an actor, so I have lots of friends who work in theater. And I did an adaptation of one of my books for the theater, and I think I was really influenced by that. So when I do it in the dialogue scenes, it's always...
You do think about that. You do.
Yeah.
So it may not be a very conscious process, but subconsciously, you're thinking about that.
Sometimes I have the feeling that when I'm writing, that I have a desk on stage in the theater, and everybody's waiting for the next sentence, and it better be good, so nobody falls asleep. So
wonderful.
So that's
wonderful. What about the thought process that goes into what is there an objective when you're writing? I mean, we clearly see that there is a contrast in terms of the surface, what we see on the surface in Scandinavian countries. But these novels seem to dig into things like murder, rape, misogyny. Sometimes they're even a commentary on social issues. So is the objective to entertain, or is the objective to bring out some of those social issues?
I think, of course, it's to entertain. I'm in a tradition that has ancestors back to the 70s of the social realism. I like to write about things in my society. So I think the social issue is there, but the main thing is to entertain. And like this story of killings is melodramas. It's from the old sagas. It was the same. It's characters we like to read about. Characters that make choices that is talked about, etc., etc. And that's the part of the entertainment.
So, is there a specific process that you follow in order to entertain? I mean, I think, frankly, one of the concerns one has, as most writers do, is how do you get your reader to turn the page? So, is there some thinking that goes into this? That how do I get someone to turn the page? What's going to make it gripping?
Yes, of course, but I don't think it's a receipt on it how it's made. But I think I'm very conscious on that when I write. Has this stuff energy? I mean,
Yes.
and sometimes I can feel myself when I lose the energy, and then it's very hard to cut. To have to cut.
Yeah.
But sometimes an editor is very useful.
Absolutely. And what about you, Halligrimur? I mean, do you look at it as a social commentary objective, or do you look at it as pure and simple entertainment, or somewhere in between?
No, I want each novel to be on many planes, many levels. One is the story, good story. Another is good characters. Third is the social aspect, social criticism of society. A little bit political in a way, but you should not be too preachy, because
Right.
that's not very clever. And then it's about the history of your nation or something else. So it has to be, you have to be able to read it from many angles. That is what makes a good novel, I think.
Right.
And earlier this year, I went through Les Miserables by Victor Hugo for the first time, and I saw all those elements in this great book. It's a crime novel, it's a social novel, it's a drama, family drama. It's about a guy trying to find love. So many things in this book.
That's right.
And
That's
history, French Revolution, and so those are the greatest novels, I think.
I've always believed that I'm not a very good writer, but I do a fairly decent job in my rewrites. So, do you go through a rewriting process, or once you're done with the manuscript, you're done with it?
Oh, it's a hard work. It's
Hard work.
a lot of work.
So-
A lot of rewriting, yes.
So, on an average, how many times do you revisit your manuscript before it reaches the stage where it's ready to be published?
It's impossible to say. I mean, I write every day,
Yeah.
and if I'm not into a big rewriting, I'm editing. So
That's right.
it's
And do you-
it's like sculpturing
Yeah.
something.
And do you feel bad when the editor says lose this, or let go of this?
He wouldn't say that. He would he would see it in a very kind way. But my editor is a very clever man, so I trust him.
Trust. How about you, Helgason?
So it's like sometimes you feel that he's cutting away one of your fingers or something. You've been toiling at this great chapter for 3 weeks, and
Yes.
he wants it out of the book, and
Yes.
it's terrible. And so you're always a little bit nervous when when you get the feedback from the editor the first time.
Right.
But about rewrites, I tend to write maybe 1 page a day or something, or sometimes a little bit more, and then I start the next day by rewriting it.
Okay.
To
So
get-
your rewrites happen while the manuscript
Yeah.
is evolving?
Yeah, so it's always like writing and then go back, rewriting and then continue, and then rewriting, continue. So I get into the mood, sort of. So
But you don't go into a loop where you want to revisit that same passage again and again and again,
No.
and then you find that your story is
it's
not
only
moving on.
the last page from the day before, and then continue.
Wonderful.
And then when a book is done, I print it out and then I read it. I
Yeah.
try to read it as a reader, and then I see how bad it is, and I try to make the corrections.
Don't we all? Don't we all? Excuse me, how much time do we have? Because we want to set up some Q&A. So I'll open it up to Q&A then in that case. So we are happy to throw the floor open for a few questions. So whoever has the mic has the right.
I know you touched upon this, but in slightly more detail, the Scandinavian countries are by all counts the standard of living, the happiness index, everything. That's what we all aspire to. But how is it that this flurry of criminal fiction emerges from what seem to be the most orderly, happiest countries in the world?
That's why it's because Scandinavia is such a perfect society. It has hardly any crime, but every society has this need for violence, so we take it in written form. So that's the expression. So where there's no crime, there's a lot of crime writing, but then you go to countries where with really a lot of crime, they're all reading some romantic poetry, you know.
So in other words, you need a contrast to...
I think so. I mean, this is like an IKEA kind of world we live in. Everything is perfect on the surface, and for example, in Iceland, we only have one murder a year.
Is that right?
Yep.
The crime statistic is one murder per year.
Yeah. So when Icelandic crime novels started, everybody was like, how can you write crime novels in Iceland where there's no crime?
Is that the same?
In Norway it's 50 a year.
Yeah, but that's still double digits.
And
That's easier.
the average killing is a drunk husband killing his wife with a kitchen knife.
Yeah. Of late there's been an increase in the crime rate in the Scandinavian countries. By of late I'm talking about, say, maybe the last 20 years or so, compared to the previous periods. Would you agree with that? Well, assuming that that is a fact, there's also been an increase in immigration into the Scandinavian countries. You think there's any connection between the two?
Definitely in Iceland, because the Lithuanian mafia and Polish mafia have had their share in some of the crimes in Iceland. So definitely innocence is a little bit gone. We have lost it. For example, this summer we used to have this tradition in Iceland that if you live in a small community in the countryside, you never locked your house. Everything was open. People didn't even ring the bell. They just opened the door and said, "Hi, I'm here." And so it was like an open society. But now, this past summer, there was some foreigners who misused this tradition, and they knocked on people's door, and if they didn't answer, they just went inside and took valuable things. So they emptied a lot of houses in the east part of Iceland, and then people gradually started locking up their houses. So, of course, yeah, we've seen this foreign influence in a bad way.
And migration is a big issue in every country, and it makes a lot of change, and it's a political discussion, and of course the biggest discussion in Norway, like in every other country, is how to integrate best.
I think your last novel was The Ice Swimmer, right?
Yes.
And that also dealt with immigration in some form?
Yes, and because it's a part of the society, and
Right.
I think when I write about the society. Therefore also migration is a part of the book, I think.
Yeah.
But it's a touchy subject, and because the racists use this thing against immigration, and
Sure.
it's difficult to talk about it
Sure.
without becoming like a racist.
Can someone give the mic to the lady here in front? Right here, right here.
You were talking about the amount of research that goes into your book, especially when you're writing it. Do you ever feel like there's not enough research when you're writing on a certain issue or a topic while writing the book, especially?
I haven't experienced that. I think it's a big world out there, and it has to. I mean, you have to learn how to do it. and you can, and now today with internet, it's a lot of source material you can find there, but you also have to go directly to people and speak with people. Right. And like Halligrimur said, you get inspired by talking to people. So
I think you have to do a lot of research, but there is a moment when you have to say stop.
That's right.
Because once I met a Korean writer who lived in the States, and she had been researching. She had a team of researchers working for her for 7 years. 2 people who researched for a novel that actually became really successful. So maybe it's a good thing. But I could never do that. I was too impatient. But I experience sometimes that when I'm writing and I have done research for this chapter, then I cannot write the next one without doing research. So sometimes it's like fuel. If you want to continue to drive, you need some more fuel.
Thank you.
Hello. It is said that every person has a book within, and it's very important to ensure that the book, sees coming out of the person's being. There is a lot of sorting, sifting, and self-exploration which needs to be done. So what is the level of relief and well-being after the book is done? Is there any?
There is a discussion because we have now a wave in literature about self-biographies, especially in Norway. A lot of people are writing their story. I don't know if Karl Ove Knausgård is a big name in India, but
autobiographies and biographies are big.
And there's a trend that more and more people write about real people, and we have now a big discussion in Norway: is that ethical, right or not? And it tends to be 2 kind of camps, some like me. I like to create things, but you also have those that really want to write about the truth out there. And maybe I'm finished when I'm finished with the book.
So I think that is probably the answer. I'm finished when I'm finished. Helgason, you want to add?
Yes, I tend to write like Kjell was talking about other people. I like to create characters. But once I wrote a autobiographical novel a couple of years ago, and was my first and only. And then I was writing about real people, about my own life, and it was of course a little bit different. I believe writing about fictional characters is richer, and it allows you more freedom, and you can do a greater work that way. But this autobiographical novel was surprisingly difficult for me to publish, because I was writing about a really difficult moment in my life when I was 20 years old. Went to Germany, to Munich, to study art, and I had the most miserable year in my life. And the worst moment came when I was raped by a foreigner in the city. And this was, of course, something I had been carrying with me for 30 years without telling anyone, not even my parents, only my wife, and not my children. And writing about it was not so hard, but it was a good thing. It was like a therapy for me. And then I believed that we live in Me Too times, and everybody was ready for this to be published. But then apparently not. I got good response at first, but then the mostly old men, they came crushing on me and accusing me of trying to sell books or create a sensation. Or this was maybe the first time that a man had written about rape, being a rape victim in Iceland. So it was a new thing, and now it's like 4 years ago, and this book was really hard to publish, and I went into like a depression after with all this discussion on me, and I had to go to therapy, and I should have done that earlier, but this was a big sort of moment for me because I felt like a new man afterwards. So it was like a cleaning therapy.
So it was very therapeutic in that sense.
Yeah, and so I feel like a new man now, and I feel stronger. And
that's wonderful.
So it was good thing for me. Book did okay, fairly well, but it was not my most successful book. But then I went on to write another book that I just published last month. So it was a new feeling I had.
So we have time for one more question, and then we'll have to wrap up.
This question is from Mr. Sanghi. In your novels, which have these, I'd say, the theosophical themes and the thriller in that, I mean, where do you get that obscure data which you don't find anywhere else? And like, what did you do? Did you do like classical studies, medieval history? What did you do?
So I don't know whether I should be answering questions because my job here is the moderator's job, but nevertheless, I'll with your permission, I will answer one question, the final question. There is really no substitute for research, and that doesn't, people think of research as reading, or as Kjell said, you start with maybe online and then go deeper into that research process. But for me, research is at various levels. So for example, if I'm writing the Krishna Key and I'm writing about Somnath, it's because I visited Somnath and checked out some of those, the things that I've talked about at Somnath, or for example, even with Dwarka or Mathura. And the nature of the research changes. So for example, a book like Chanakya's Chant has a police interrogation scene, and I didn't know the first thing about how this works in the Indian context. So until I met a policeman who showed me a 2-inch pipe, and he said that, this is a black pipe, about roughly 2.5 feet long. He said, we call it a Samaj Sudharak. I said, what is a Samaj Sudharak? He said, it's a reformer of society reformation. So I said, how does this work? He said, well, if you are in the lockup, we can beat you with this, and it would hurt immensely, but you would not have internal wounds, nor would there be any visible wounds on your body, which means very little would show up in the post-mortem. Now that, in my opinion, is research. And that you will never pick up purely from the online material or reading. A book like the Sialkot Saga involved 1/2 of the story right here in Kolkata. I've never lived in Kolkata, but luckily I was able to meet 4 or 5 people who had lived through this city through the 1940s and 50s and 60s. So they were able to give me the essence of what that story, what the city would have been like. That's also research. So I think it's a lot of things which constitute research.